What if the most profound lesson on how to live wasn't found in a lecture or a book, but in the final breaths of a dying man? 25 centuries ago, the Buddha lay dying, but instead of an ending, his death became a masterclass, a live demonstration of what happens to consciousness when the body fails. He didn't just show us how to die, he revealed a secret about the very nature of life itself. Let me ask you a question we all avoid. What do you believe truly happens in the moment after you die? For most of us, that question is a black box of fear and uncertainty. But what if there was a 2.50-year-old map, a detailed guide to that final journey, meticulously charted by generations of explorers of the mind? Buddhism doesn't offer easy comfort about death. It offers something far more powerful: clarity. For centuries, we've been told that science and spirituality are on opposite teams, especially on the topic of death. But what if I told you that modern neuroscience and quantum physics are now beginning to validate the extraordinary claims made by ancient Buddhist masters about what consciousness is, and what happens to it after the body is gone? This isn't just a spiritual exploration. It's a journey to the frontier where ancient wisdom and modern science converge. The story begins between two sala trees, where the Buddha lay dying. His body, now frail and old, was racked with dysentery. Around him, his most devoted disciples wept openly, their grief echoing through the quiet grove. Ananda, his faithful attendant for decades, couldn't stop his body from shaking. "Master," Ananda sobbed, his voice breaking, "how can we possibly live without you?" The Buddha's eyes opened, and in them was not pain, but a surprising, boundless gentleness. "Don't grieve, my dear friend," he whispered. "Everything that is composed must one day decompose. Even this old body must return to dust." But what happened next would forever change everything his students thought they knew about death. Instead of simply fading away into unconsciousness, the Buddha did something truly remarkable. Ancient texts describe him entering the first meditative absorption, a state of profound concentration. Then, with calm intention, he ascended to the second, the third, each level deeper and more subtle than the last. His breathing slowed to a whisper. His face became utterly serene. The disciples watched in silent amazement as their teacher systematically moved through the deepest states of consciousness, finally dissolving into a reality beyond all ordinary experience. This wasn't just a great teacher dying, this was a masterclass. All conditioned things are subject to decay. Strive on with diligence. These were his final words. Then, according to later Mahayana tradition, something luminous occurred as his consciousness finally departed its physical form. Witnesses reported a brilliant, radiant light, not from an external source, but blazing from within. It was as if awareness itself had transformed into pure, unadulterated light. 25 centuries later, we are still trying to unpack the depth of what the Buddha demonstrated that day. Because I believe he didn't just show us how to die consciously. He revealed something staggeringly profound about the nature of consciousness itself. I'm Peter, and tonight, we begin what may be the most important exploration this channel has ever undertaken. But first, I need to be honest about why this matters so much to me personally, and why I believe it might just transform how you see both life and death. A few years ago, I experienced what I can only call a death awakening. My father was dying in hospice, and I was completely, utterly unprepared. Watching someone you love slip away while you stand there, helpless, is an experience that shatters you. It broke something fundamental inside of me. That night, I couldn't sleep, not just from the crushing weight of grief, but from a new and terrifying realization. I had absolutely no idea what had just happened to him. Where did he go? The thought of my own inevitable death became this heavy cloak I carried everywhere. So, I did what any obsessive researcher does. I began a desperate search for a map. I dove deep into every tradition's teachings on death: Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, but it was the Buddhist death teachings that stopped me in my tracks. Not because they offered easy, sentimental comfort, Buddhism rarely does that, but because they offered something infinitely more valuable: detailed, practical maps based on 2.50 years of people actually studying what happens when consciousness departs the body. Tonight, we begin a series of explorations into this profound mystery. If you've been following our journey together, you know we've explored why Buddhists don't believe in a creator God and examined the concept of emptiness that underlies all existence. Tonight, we step into Buddhism's most sacred and intimate territory, because Buddhism teaches something that turns our entire concept of death upside down. Death isn't a termination, it is a transformation, and different Buddhist traditions have developed completely different navigation systems for this same mysterious journey. But here's what truly changed my perspective completely. Modern science is now beginning to validate these ancient insights in ways that have the power to convince even a former skeptic like me. Are you ready? Together, let's open the door. Let me start with a modern story that captures the very essence of what we're about to explore. Last year, a woman named Sarah Chen was dying of pancreatic cancer at a Buddhist hospice in San Francisco. She had been terrified of death her entire life, yet, in her final moments, something remarkable happened. As her breathing gently stopped, she opened her eyes, smiled at her daughter, and whispered, "I can feel my body dissolving, but I'm still here." It's exactly like the teachings described. Her death wasn't a failure or an ending. It was a practice. This single story illustrates Buddhism's most radical teaching. Death isn't a cliff you fall off, but a process that can be navigated consciously, skillfully, and even peacefully if you understand what's actually happening. So, what does Buddhism say really occurs when you die? There are three foundational insights that challenge everything most of us were told to believe. First, there is no eternal, unchanging soul that departs your body. The Buddha taught that what we call a self is actually a dynamic convergence of 5 ever-changing processes. Picture a whirlpool in a river. It has a recognizable pattern. It seems like a solid thing, but it's actually just water, energy, and momentum moving in a particular way. When the conditions change and the whirlpool dissolves, what dies? Nothing substantial was ever there to begin with. Second, death is transformation, not termination. So what continues? What continues is your karmic stream, the unstoppable momentum of your actions, faults, and intentions. As we explored in our video on karma, this isn't about a cosmic judge delivering punishment or reward. It's about natural cause and effect. Think of a wave traveling across the vast ocean. The individual water molecules change from moment to moment, but the wave's pattern, its energy, continues, carrying its force from one shore to another. And third, how you experience death depends entirely on your understanding of these truths. As the Dharmapada teaches, those who recognize the impermanent, fluid nature of selfhood can approach death with clarity and even a sense of profound curiosity. Those who spend their lives clinging to the illusion of a permanent, solid self experience confusion and terror as that very illusion dissolves before their eyes. But here's what initially confused me most in my research. Different Buddhist traditions seem to give completely different answers about what happens after death. At first, I thought they were contradicting each other. Then I realized something profound. They're not giving different answers. They're answering different questions. They are addressing the very same questions that every single dying person asks. During my years studying these practices, I kept encountering the same pattern. Each tradition seemed to address the specific, universal fears that arise when we face our mortality. And honestly, these were the exact questions that kept me awake at night after my father died. Let me show you what I mean. By drawing from the documented accounts of how accomplished Buddhist masters have approached their own deaths, each demonstrating a different facet of this wisdom. Question 1. Will it hurt? The fear of physical suffering. In the Thai forest tradition of Theravada Buddhism, when masters like the great Ajahn Chah were dying, they would often turn their final days into profound teaching opportunities. As Ajahn Chah's body was failing from the complications of diabetes, instead of showing distress, he demonstrated something remarkable. He would tell his students gathered around him, "Watch carefully, see how the body returns to its elements. This old cart is falling apart, but the driver, that which was driving it, continues on." This is the Theravada answer to what dying feels like. They map it with clinical precision. First, your body's systems begin to fail. The earth element dissolves, leading to a feeling of heaviness. The water element dissolves, and bodily fluids dry up. The fire element dissolves, and your temperature drops. The air element dissolves, and breathing becomes difficult. As physical sensations fade, emotional reactivity diminishes. As perception dissolves, recognition of familiar faces and places disappears. As mental formations scatter, memories and plans lose their coherence. Finally, consciousness itself transitions from its embodied state. Ajahn Chah would describe this unfolding process with his characteristic, unflinching directness. His students watched as he demonstrated exactly what thousands of Theravada practitioners had observed before him: the peaceful, natural dissolution of that which was never permanent to begin with. For these practitioners, death isn't some terrifying, foreign territory. Why? Because they've been watching these same processes the arising and passing away of thoughts, sensations, and emotions every single day in their meditation. As the Dhammapada continues, when one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. Theravada Buddhism directly answers the fear of pain by showing it to be a natural, observable process. Question 2. Will I lose myself? The fear of unconsciousness. In the Tibetan tradition, masters like the legendary Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche have demonstrated something truly extraordinary. When this deeply revered teacher was dying in 1991, instead of losing awareness as his body failed, witnesses reported that he seemed to become more lucid, more radiantly present. According to his students, Khyentse Rinpoche remained in a full meditation posture for 3 days after clinical death had been declared. His body showed no signs of decay, and the area around his heart remained physically warm, exactly as the ancient Tibetan texts describe happens during the clear light dissolution process. This is Tibetan Buddhism's powerful answer. Yes, you can not only maintain, but expand your awareness through death, if you understand the process. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Thodol, states that at the moment of death, the true nature of our mind, a luminous, boundless clarity, is revealed. Khyentse Rinpoche's students described his final days as a living demonstration of these teachings. Though his body was clearly failing, his awareness seemed to expand rather than contract. The Bardo Thodol instructs, "This luminosity is your own true nature. Rest in this recognition." This is precisely what Tibetan practitioners call conscious dying, maintaining clear awareness through stages that most people experience in a state of confusion and fear. Khyentse Rinpoche's 3-day meditation after clinical death became legendary, seen as irrefutable proof that consciousness can navigate the dying process with complete lucidity. Tibetan Buddhism answers the fear of unconsciousness with the promise of radical awareness. Question 3. Is this the end of me? The fear of annihilation. Zen masters have historically approached death with a remarkable equanimity, sometimes even with a playful sense of humor. The 15th century master Ikkyu, facing his final moments, composed this death poem: "I won't die, I won't go anywhere, I'll be right here, but don't ask me anything, I won't answer." Even more striking was the 13th century master Dogen, the founder of the Soto Zen school. When asked by his distraught students for some final words of wisdom, he simply said, "This is how it is." Then he passed away in perfect, profound silence. This points to Zen Buddhism's most radical answer: there is no death. Because there was never a separate, solid self to die in the first place, what we call dying is actually the final, complete dissolution of that illusion of selfhood, revealing the boundless reality that was always true, as Dogen taught in his masterwork, the Shibogenzo. To study the self is to forget the self. These Zen masters embodied the teaching that death is the ultimate revelation of no self. Their calm acceptance, even their laughter in the face of death, wasn't denial, it was the deepest form of recognition. Nothing real was ending. Because nothing separate and substantial had ever truly begun, Zen answers the fear of losing your identity by revealing you as something far greater than you ever imagined. Question 4. Am I worthy? Am I ready? The fear of being unprepared. Finally, Pure Land Buddhism offers what is perhaps the most compassionate and accessible approach to conscious dying. In countless documented cases throughout history, ordinary practitioners, people with no special meditative training, have died peacefully and joyfully through simple faith and the chanting of a sacred name. The practice is beautifully simple. The sincere calling upon Amitabha Buddha's name with complete and total trust. No elaborate spiritual accomplishments are required, only a wholehearted surrender to the Buddha's infinite compassion. The founder of the Jodo Shinshu school, Shinran, taught something radical. This isn't just an act of blind faith. It's an act of profound recognition, a recognition that the Buddha's boundless compassion extends even, and especially, to those of us who feel completely lost or unworthy. In Japanese Pure Land temples, you can find countless historical records of ordinary people, farmers, merchants, even those who had lived difficult or troubled lives, who died with serene, beatific expressions on their faces while chanting Amitabha's name. Pure Land powerfully answers the deep-seated fear that we are not good enough or ready enough to face death, offering a path of profound grace and unconditional acceptance. So we have 4 distinct paths, 4 profound maps for navigating our final moments. We have the path of mindful observation, the path of radiant lucidity, the path of radical non-self, and the path of absolute trust. Each addresses a universal fear, transforming it from an obstacle into a doorway. But looking at these 4 incredible traditions, a new question begins to emerge. While they seem different on the surface, are they all pointing toward the same ultimate reality? And how do these ancient maps, drawn from inner experience, align with what modern science is now beginning to discover about the enduring mystery of consciousness itself? That is the journey we will continue on next. So we have these 4 profound maps for navigating our final moments, each one forged in the crucible of deep contemplative practice. We have the path of mindful observation, the path of radiant lucidity, the path of radical non-self, and the path of absolute trust. Each addresses a universal fear, transforming it from an obstacle into a doorway. But, as a modern person living in a scientific age, I have to admit, when I first learned about these different approaches, a healthy dose of skepticism arose. How could ancient meditation teachers, without the aid of EEGs or sophisticated brain scanners, possibly know what actually happens during the process of dying? How could they scientifically measure something as ethereal as consciousness? I was ready to treat these teachings as beautiful metaphors, as inspiring philosophy, perhaps even as comforting mythology. But that's when my research took an unexpected and startling turn, one that honestly shook my materialistic worldview to its very core. I encountered the rigorous research of Dr. Pim van Lommel, a Dutch cardiologist who spent decades studying a phenomenon he couldn't ignore. Patients who had been clinically dead, no heartbeat, no measurable brain activity, but who returned with detailed, lucid memories of their experience. What truly surprised Dr. Van Lommel, as he stated in his work, was how consistently these modern-day accounts matched the descriptions found in ancient Buddhist texts. Patients described the distinct sensation of leaving their physical bodies, of moving through tunnels of brilliant light, and of encountering beings of profound compassion. The progression of their journey was almost identical to what Tibetan Buddhism calls the Bardo, the intermediate state. Then I discovered the story of Dr. Ibn Alexander, and this was even more staggering. Dr. Alexander was not just any doctor. He was a Harvard-trained neurosurgeon whose entire career was built on the premise that the brain produces consciousness. When a rare form of bacterial meningitis sent him into a coma for 7 days, his neocortex, the part of the brain supposedly responsible for all thought and awareness, was completely shut down. It was offline, incapable of producing even a dream. Yet, he returned with vivid, hyper-real memories of journeying through remarkable, multi-dimensional realms, guided by loving, intelligent presences. The experience, Dr. Alexander later wrote, was entirely consistent with what contemplatives have described for centuries. It suggests consciousness may be fundamental to reality, not just a byproduct of the brain. Now, we must be intellectually honest. Not all scientists agree with these interpretations. Many argue, quite reasonably, that near-death experiences can be explained by purely physical phenomena, brain chemistry changes during cardiac arrest, residual neural activity, a flood of neurotransmitters, or simple oxygen deprivation. This debate continues to rage in academic circles, and it's important to acknowledge these alternative explanations. But what truly began to convince me, beyond the academic debate, was talking to the people who are on the front lines of death every single day. Hospice workers. Dr. Christopher Kerr, a hospice doctor, has documented thousands of cases where dying patients report coherent, meaningful visions of deceased loved ones, spiritual realms, and guided journeys that bring them profound and tangible peace. I spoke with one hospice nurse, Sarah Martinez, who told me something that sent a chill down my spine. It's different with the Buddhist patients. She said, there's a quiet confidence. They aren't just passively dying. They are actively participating in the process. They describe stages, sensations, and experiences that match their teachings with uncanny accuracy. It's like they have detailed roadmaps, and they're simply calling out the landmarks as they pass them. The convergence was undeniable. Modern neuroscience was documenting phenomena that ancient Buddhist practitioners had meticulously mapped thousands of years ago through the pure, focused investigation of their own minds. But that's when I realized I was missing the most important question of all. So what does any of this actually mean for how I live my life? Right here, right now, how does this change the way I approach my own inevitable death? That's when everything clicked into place. In a moment of insight that changed my life completely. 6 months into this deep dive, I was meditating one evening, still carrying that familiar, heavy weight of death anxiety from my father's passing. I had learned all these incredible Buddhist theories, But on a gut level, I was still fundamentally terrified. Then, something shifted. I was reflecting on what the masters demonstrated. This idea of a clear light, of consciousness that reveals itself at death, recognizing its own essential nature. Suddenly, a question arose in my mind that changed everything. What if this clear light isn't something that appears only at death? I sat there on my cushion, and for the first time, I didn't just watch my thoughts. I noticed the awareness that was observing my thoughts. Not the thoughts themselves, but the vast, silent, empty space in which they were appearing and disappearing. It was this luminous, knowing presence that seemed completely untouched, completely unharmed by whatever thought, emotion, or sensation arose within it. And it hit me with the force of a tidal wave. This was it. This was what all the death teachings were truly pointing toward. The awareness that could calmly observe thoughts arising and passing away was the very same awareness that could observe the body arising and passing away. The consciousness that remained constant through all the changes and dramas of my life was the exact same consciousness that would navigate the great transition of death. I wasn't just learning about some distant, future experience. I was discovering what was already here, already indestructible, already free from the entire drama of birth and death. Here's something incredibly practical you can try right now. The next time you sit, even for a moment, and notice a thought arise and then dissolve back into silence, you are, in a very real way, rehearsing for death. Every exhale can be a micro-death, a tiny letting go. This is the practice, here and now. Every time I meditated and the storm of my thoughts quieted down, I was practicing the recognition of that peaceful ground of being. Every moment I observed a strong emotion arise and pass away without getting swept away by it. I was rehearsing the ultimate letting go. Every instant I recognized the awareness itself, rather than getting lost in its contents. I was preparing for the recognition that transcends death entirely. This is why studying death so profoundly transforms how you live, not because it prepares you for some future event, but because it reveals the indestructible, luminous nature of the consciousness that is operating within you right now. The fear didn't disappear overnight, but something fundamental shifted deep within me. Death stopped being this terrifying, unknown cliff, and it became an object of profound curiosity. What will it be like when all this mental activity, all this noise, finally quiets down completely? What will pure awareness recognize about itself when there's nothing left to distract it? Whether it's through the Theravada path of observing impermanence, the Zen recognition of no self, the Pure Land surrender to grace, or the Tibetan navigation of consciousness states, all Buddhist death practices ultimately point toward the same life-altering discovery. The awareness that can consciously navigate death is the very same awareness that can consciously navigate any experience. Understanding death doesn't just prepare you for dying, it awakens you to the staggering miracle of being conscious in the first place. And thinking back to my father's death, I realized I had finally found something he would have wanted me to know. That the love connecting us was not in our bodies or our personalities, but was part of this same indestructible awareness. Death couldn't touch, and could never touch, what was most essential about our relationship. We've now explored Buddhism's profound understanding of the moment of death itself, those four universal questions every dying person faces, and how the different traditions provide navigation tools for a conscious departure. But we've only examined the beginning of the journey, what happens after consciousness separates from the body. This is where Buddhist teaching becomes truly mind-bending. According to the Tibetan tradition, after the brilliant, clear light moment, consciousness enters what may be the strangest journey any being can experience, the Bardo of Dharmata, a realm where thoughts manifest instantly as reality, where karmic visions arise with overwhelming, hallucinatory intensity, where the conditions for our next rebirth take shape, according to the patterns we have accumulated across countless lifetimes. We touched on this in our past exploration of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. But next week, we are going to go much deeper into this mysterious, intermediate state. This journey may last up to 49 days. But here is the key revelation that will guide our next episode. And it might just change how you see every moment of your waking life. What if the after-death journey isn't something that begins when the heart stops? What if the Bardo is the very fabric of consciousness you are living in? Right now, think about it. In your dreams, your thoughts become the reality you experience. In moments of strong emotion, your inner state literally creates the world you perceive. In meditation, mental projections can arise and dissolve like living beings. What if consciousness, finally recognizing its own raw, creative power without the filter of a physical body, is exactly what's happening in every single moment of awareness? Next week, we'll explore how our thoughts become our reality in these intermediate states, why some beings find immediate rebirth while others wander the full journey, and the startling possibility that you are already navigating Bardo states without even recognizing them. If tonight's exploration has expanded your understanding or opened a new door in your own mind, then I warmly invite you to join us on this journey by subscribing and hitting the notification bell. Please share this with anyone you know who is curious about the great mysteries of consciousness and death. And tell us in the comments, which of the four Buddhist approaches to death resonated most with your own thoughts and feelings? How has learning about conscious dying changed your perspective on mortality? Remember, consciousness is stranger than death, and perhaps stranger even than life itself. The exploration we are beginning together isn't just about understanding our end. It's about awakening to the true nature of awareness itself. Until next time, stay curious. The mystery deepens next week, and what we'll discover might just reveal that death is not the end of the story, but the beginning of understanding who we really are.